Now, President Vladimir Putin has warned that the West that Russia could use nuclear weapons if it is struck with conventional missiles, and that Moscow could consider any assault on it supported by a nuclear power to be a joint attack. The decision to change Russia's official nuclear doctrine is the Kremlin's answer to deliberations in the United States and Britain about whether or not to give Ukraine permission to fire conventional Western missiles into Russia. Putin opened a meeting of Russia's Security Council, said the changes were in response to a swiftly changing global landscape which had thrown up new threats and risks for Russia.
Предложено внести ряд уточнений в части определения условий применения ядерного оружия.
It is proposed to introduce several clarifications in defining the conditions for the use of nuclear weapons. Thus, the draft of the fundamentals of state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence expands the category of states and military alliances in relation to which nuclear deterrence is carried out, adding to the list of military threats, for the neutralization of which nuclear deterrence measures are carried out. The revised version of the document proposes to consider the aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear state.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy will visit the White House on Thursday to present his victory plan to President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, according to Kiev. Zelenskyy wants the U.S. to increase its military support for Ukraine and allow the use of long-range missiles in the Russian territory. The Ukrainian president will also meet with senators in the bipartisan session organized by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, according to sources from the U.S. Congress.
U.S. security assistance to Ukraine, a package that includes more ammunition, artillery, armored vehicles to bolster Ukraine's battlefield abilities. And the United States continues to help Ukraine respond, recover, and rebuild.
Well, for more of this, let's bring in Dr. Marek, European Affairs Analyst. Good to see you on the program today. Now, let's start off with, the issue about Ukraine's desire to be allowed to use long-range missiles into Russia. What do you think about this with the rising tension in the war between Russia and Ukraine?
The first point to note is that Zelenskyy's peace plan, victory plan as you call it, is totally unrealistic. It will not bring victory. It is, once again, not a serious attempt at negotiation because Putin will never agree to such terms, and that this is, if you like, just one more collective peace plan failure. However, there is a new point in his plan to allow him to use Western missiles to hit Russia. This is another escalation which may ultimately tip the world over into a nuclear confrontation. There is no need for him to do that, except, of course, the fact that it's very annoying, to say the least, and extremely unpleasant to have Russia be able to fire missiles. But the notion of firing Western missiles into Ukraine could bring about, exactly as Putin warned, a nuclear missile. Ukraine has poo-pooed this possibility. Unfortunately, it remains very real.
Well, because we've just heard the Russian president saying that he's warning that he's warning the West that Russia could use nuclear weapons. What would be the implication of this if it eventually happens?
There are two aspects to note. First of all, as you point out, Putin has lowered the nuclear threshold at which Russia is prepared to use bombs, nuclear bombs. This is already very significant. And again, is just one more indication that the world is going towards World War III, unfortunately. However, what is also quite clear is that if Russia uses them, it will be such a shock all round that the world may not go any further on this path. It is also quite clear that Putin is warning he may well do that because in the end, he will be forced either to, as Zelenskyy would prefer, abandon the war or to press it to a successful conclusion. And no dictator can afford to lose the war, and no dictator can afford to have Moscow, his capital city, bombed.
All right. I'm just wondering if you actually listened to Zelensky's speech to the UN General Assembly. Just want to get your thoughts on what you make of his speech to the Assembly.
The problem with his speeches are in that they're always the same. He basically wants a total victory of Russian forces clear of Ukraine, which, as I say, is unrealistic to imagine that Putin will agree to this peacefully, and that therefore his victory plan involving attacking Russia, I can't see, and nor can others, that this will necessarily bring about his victory. After all, his Kursk invasion has actually got nowhere except for splitting Ukrainian forces, so making it able for Russia to further make gains down south. So his UN speech, applauded, important in PR terms, well staged by him, is in fact, in terms of this war, one more absolutely wasted speech.
All right. So before I, conclude on this, I just want to, just to have a scenario. What in your view, will be the alternative scenarios or outcomes that could emerge if Zelensky's plan is not successful?
I would see only, in fact, there are three possibilities. One of them is some sort of stalemate. This was actually happening before the Kursk's incursion, because what was happening, Ukraine was just strong enough to keep the Russians at bay. This is no longer the case. The Russians are now advancing, so this is unlikely to be a scenario for some time. Secondly, that Ukraine is given Western missiles, and therefore Russia is put right on the edge of whether it should take that step or not. And unfortunately, historically, Russia has always been prepared to take that step. So that is now, unfortunately, most likely scenario that they will get the missiles and that there will eventually be a nuclear bomb used. The third one is that some sort of compromise peace plan is reached, which I believe is the correct solution where nobody gets what they want, but at the very least, the war is stopped. Unfortunately, as we stand, this is the least likely scenario. And therefore, as I said before, we are heading the wrong way towards an ever greater confrontation.
Many thanks, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for your insights. European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, talking with us there. Many thanks.